Welcome to the May 25th, 2023 Portsmouth Planning Board Workshop meeting. We have a fairly light agenda, and the primary purpose of the first part of the night is to hear from our principal planner to talk about the proposed zoning amendment that is scheduled for a public hearing at the council on July 15th?
It's going to be second reading July 10th.
10th.
Yeah, I had to get the date in my head.
And this board has had a practice of having a workshop and a public hearing, and I like that because our public hearings, the public gets a chance to interact with us. It's not required. So if the board does not want to have a public hearing on this, we don't have to have one. If we do, we should do it on the 25th of June. 15th. 15th of June. 22nd could be our workshop, which would be a different thing. So think about that as Nick is presenting, and we can decide while we're talking about the nuts and bolts of this proposal. Nick?
Okay, good evening, everyone. Beth, Greg, Jane, Andrew, Jim, and Joseph, and Rick. Okay, so obviously it's a work session we're having here tonight to talk and have a general discussion about the incentive amendments that we put together largely in the planning department with input from the land use committee. And the land use committee has a work plan for the next year. We've been working, as you know, on the ADU ordinance for the first year. We started out with the building height amendments that lasted probably 6 to 7 months on the front end, then we did the ADU amendment to the ordinance, and now what we're looking at are the incentives in the zoning ordinance that affect workforce housing as well as community space in respect to the downtown portion of the incentives. So the incentives in the zoning today are either in the character districts, which are downtown, this form-based code area that includes the north end, the downtown, and the west end, and Islington Street connecting them. And then we have the gateway districts that are the outlying districts. We're not going to be talking tonight about the gateway districts. They're quite different in the code. There's also form-based standards in the gateway district, but that'll be sort of part B of the incentives in the zoning. So we're focused tonight exclusively on the density incentives in the character districts. So if I will drive this thing if I can. I can't. There it is. Okay, so I broke this presentation into 6 parts. It won't take very long to get through them, but I think they're all discrete, so they needed to be broken into that many sections. We're going to talk about the density incentives in the overlay districts. That's the north end and the west end. Then we're going to talk for a few minutes about the density incentives these are already in place in the code. So what we're talking about doing is amending them, not creating them. The second one's the density incentives for large building footprints, projects like the Brick Market. And I'll give you examples of projects that have used these various incentives. Then part 3 will be the density incentives for larger parcels in the downtown as well as the west and north end. And then part 4, we'll just talk about a couple of new community space types that we think would be useful to add to our current repertoire. We have 13 community space types. There's certainly the need for at least the 2 that are proposed, if not more. So we'll have a conversation about that. And part 5, we'll talk about the fact that we, at least in our opinion, need to exempt community spaces like plazas or parks that sit on top of subsurface parking from being counted in the building footprint, because we have building footprint maximums that are easily violated when you take an underground parking structure with a couple of steps to go up on top of it to either a green park or a hardscape space. So we'll talk about that. And then lastly, a very minor change to the building height map. This isn't so different from what we talked about earlier in the conversation with 1 Congress Street and moving that from 40 to 45 feet. Most of you remember that conversation 8-9 months ago. This is a change for the south side of Bow Street to be more consistent with the existing context and character on that side of Bow Street. So I'll walk you through that. So part 1, we've got the density incentives in the overlay districts. Again, we have 2 of these. There's a map, a couple of slides in here that show the north end they're both along the North Mill Pond. One's in the west end, one's in the north end. I think everybody here is very familiar with where they are. The way it works now, the existing density incentive in the overlay districts, so a parcel can be of any size. It doesn't have to be an acre or more in the north or west end overlay districts. The incentive or the carrot for the builder, the developer.
Just check.
Does this do that? Okay.
No, I just,
We're playing with the toys. Is the you get an additional story of height or 10 feet is one of the two carrots or incentives to the builder, and an increased building footprint anywhere from 20 to 30,000 square feet, depending on which character district you're in. The requirements, or the sticks, if you will, carrots and sticks is how I like to characterize the incentives and the requirements. The sticks require the property owner to deed the city 20% of the parcel size as community space. And as I said earlier, there are 13 types. You just see 4 of them there on the right-hand side out of the book, but there are 13 of those. The ones up there are the park, the greenway, the pedestrian alleyway, and a wide pedestrian sidewalk. The second stick, so the key word here is the "or" that's underlined. So the stick is you either do the community space or workforce housing. And the workforce housing requirement is pretty high at 30% for ownership and 10% for rental. That's the primary reason, not only the word "or," but also the amount of workforce housing that's required, again, in largely downtown locations is what we're talking about here. There's an economic disincentive in a big way to provide that much workforce housing for the carrot, which are the 2 items under the incentive. So again, that's existing. So who's used it? All those stars represent projects that have used this density incentive, and this is the North End Overlay District. That little star on the bottom is actually 105 Bartlett, which is not under that star. It's further off the page, but that's in the West End. So you've got across from the parking garage there, top one. So, the parking garage is in there. This is 89 Foundry. This is where the hotel's going on Lot 3. This is the one on the corner where Wells Fargo now sits. This is 2 Russell. This is 53 Green. This is 1 Rains, and this is 145 Maplewood. They've all used this density incentive to obtain an extra story of height, and in exchange for the 20% or more of community space. None of them have done workforce housing. The only one that had proposed it but didn't build it was the previous project here at where the Wells Fargo building is at 161 Deer Street. Okay, so that's where it's been used. What are we proposing to do with the overlay districts in respect to the density incentives? Number one, give the planning board control over whether the additional density incentive should be granted. And the only way we can effectively do that is with a conditional use permit. Right now, it's so-called as of right. So these projects that I just put up there with the 8 stars, they didn't have to come in and ask if they could put an extra story on. They simply had to provide the 20% community space and demonstrate that it was on the ground, it met one of the 13 types or one or more, and we were obligated to give them that extra density. This will give the planning board considerable control over whether the applicant has met the standard in order to get that added density. So that's number one on here, to move from an as-of-right condition to a conditional use permit. Number two, when you have a lot that's more than 100 feet from the North Mill Pond, which is probably half the properties in the north end overlay and 2/3 of the properties in the West End, right now you can do the community space or the workforce housing. You'll be required to do both if this amendment passes as initially drafted. So there'll be a requirement to do both community space and workforce housing. And obviously what we've done in number 3 is toggle the numbers, because you just can't heap more costs on the developer, or there will be nobody asking for this permit, and we will get neither community space or workforce housing. So the numbers need to make some more than a modicum of sense from an economic standpoint, otherwise the incentive will be useless. All right, so here are the potentially affected parcels, and again, this is just meant to as example. There may be more. There could be projects, as you know, that don't get built as approved that would come back in and be affected by this amendment. But these are properties that are out there and have not yet obtained entitlements to redevelop the parcel. There's two, yeah.
These are 1 acre plus parcel?
No, these are not 1 acre. We're in the overlay district, any size goes. So these two stars are actually on the same property. This is 111 Maplewood where the Portsmouth Herald building is. It's not unlikely at some point in the future that will be redeveloped, the parking lot and the building. So they're potentially affected by what we're talking about today. This is lot 4, the one between the hotel and the corner, that would be affected. Should they seek the conditional use permit. Remember that, most importantly, this is a voluntary permit. Nobody has to ask for this. We are not affecting with these amendments the underlying development rights of any of these properties. This is an a voluntary overlay district where they can opt in and ask to do a taller building, but they don't have to. This is the Redland Johnson. Now it's the kitchen.
Ferguson.
Thank you.
Ferguson Plumbing.
So that's shockingly still there, but it won't be in 10 or 15 years, given the size of the building and the quality of the building that's there, especially as this stuff starts to take shape around it. Then you have 361 Hanover, which is the former Heinemann building. This building used to be 6 or 7 stories. I believe it had a fire, and it's down to the almost a 2-story form. That's going to be, it's underneath that star, goes out to Hanover. That's going to be redeveloped in the next couple of years. If not sooner, and that will be coming before you. So it's important that we address some of these emerging projects and try and get this code to be a little more effective at generating better community space and some workforce housing. Yes, Joe?
Just a technicality, how hard is that dotted line around the overlay district?
It's hard.
Okay,
The
why-
overlay, that line is the line it is.
Why is it, Nick, that it doesn't include the parking lot for that building where you are right now?
Difference.
Because it doesn't.
It's a separate lot?
Yep.
Okay.
Somebody drew the line there.
Yeah, intentionally, because we didn't want taller buildings on next to the Pearl and up on Hanover Street, so they wouldn't be able as an owner to put a taller building on that parking lot across from the Pearl and in front of the Heinemann.
But the parking lot is considered a separate lot as well?
No.
Oh, it's not?
No,
Okay.
they just wouldn't be able to bring the taller building outside the overlay district to that location. That's the intention. We can talk more about Heinemann. I would argue as a separate conversation from tonight, we need to take another pass at the zoning for the Heinemann property to come up with something more effective for both the owner and the city to provide better protection against inappropriate buildings finding their way into that parking lot. But that's for another night. Okay, so everybody kind of good with the overlay districts, the first of 3 incentives?
Should we be asking questions along the way?
Maybe you should now before I get into the larger.
I just had one question about
Is that okay?
the deeded 20% community space that you
Yes.
spoke of.
Yes.
It's deeded to the city. Does the city have to maintain it, clean it, plow it, rebuild it when it needs rebuilding?
Depends on the type of community space that's created. A lot of the community space that we have been creating, we'll have a slide up here a little bit later to remind everybody what the 13 types are. We haven't had everybody do all 13 yet. Most people do a wide pedestrian sidewalk. And, a lot of people say, well, what are we getting out of that? We're getting outdoor dining because of a wide pedestrian sidewalk, because you can't walk by a 5-foot sidewalk when there's tables and chairs on it. So those wide pedestrian sidewalks are typically maintained by the city if they're on along a city street.
Yeah.
And we get an easement for the next 4 or 6 feet on the
I
property.
just wanted to know if the 20% deeded community space
It's variable,
became
Joe.
a taxpayer burden, or if the city has to take care of that after the fact.
Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. But, it's about a taxpayer benefit of having that public space.
Understood.
Yes, sir.
Page 6, question, statement number 2, requires lots greater than 100 feet
Yes.
from the North Mill Pond to provide both community space and workforce housing.
Yes.
I get the both, that makes a lot of sense, like it, but greater than 100, is that under the assumption that they're not going to build less than 100 because we won't let them?
No. Good question, Greg. The way the ordinance is structured today,
Yeah.
which you're reading from,
Yep.
there's probably, you're reading the
No, I'm reading
amended text, right?
Proposed changes.
Right.
Yeah.
But everything that's black on there is already in the code. With the way when we did the North End vision plan and I'll just explain
Nothing
it, sorry.
blank. Page 6, 3 little
He's
bullet
looking at your
points.
presentation, not
Oh,
the code.
you're looking at the
I'm-
present.
I'm on your presentation.
Okay, sorry. Let me just go back up then. All lots within 100 feet,
Yep.
within 100 feet of the North Mill Pond.
Yep,
From when we adopted the code in 2000, I'm going to guess 15,
yep,
we have said in 2015 to the present, and I haven't changed it, that all the lots along the mill pond.
100 feet or less.
That touch it,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
So you could have 80 feet and not be on the water, but still be affected as a mill pond, within 100 feet of the mill pond.
Yep.
But the way it's set up in Portsmouth, all 100 feet is within the lot that is there, whether it's 53 Green or 1 Rains, right?
Yep.
We are not saying today in the code, you can't build in the 100-foot buffer. We actually say things that suggest you can with the greenway and how far it is from a building, right? I know it's disputed from people as to whether that's a good or bad thing.
Right.
I'm just telling you what it is.
Yep.
What's in front of you for the amendment does not change the existing condition, and I'll tell you why we didn't do that.
That's what I'm asking.
We didn't do that because the assumption we've made is the greenway is what everybody wanted in the vision plan. Granted, 2015 is 8 years ago, but the 300 participants that were at 111 Maplewood for 3 days doing the charrette wanted a greenway along the waterfront. The greenway is a pathway, whether it's on the edge or a few feet back, that's not so important. Well, the city felt, as did the public, if we want a greenway to go from Market Street at least to Maplewood and hopefully to Bartlett, we'd prefer not to pay for it. We'd prefer not to go and take either by eminent domain, because one person stopping a link would not allow us to make a link. So even if a property 50 feet off the edge of the North Mill Pond may not be developable for a building, does not mean it's free for the taking from the city. So in order for us to build, again, this is where we were in 2015, in order to create a greenway that's made up of anywhere between 8 and 9 properties from one end to the other, if you don't take something that isn't available, you'll never get the greenway actually built till they're all voluntarily donated to the city. So the exchange was, and I encourage, as I did at the HDC when this continuously comes up, people should look at that vision plan and see that, for example, on Rains Ave, 53 Green Street's almost verbatim what's in the vision plan, but 1 Rains Ave has 7 buildings in the 100-foot buffer. They may be small and people want it to step up, but they're all in the 100-foot buffer. It's a vision plan and it's just a concept, but that drove the zoning, that vision plan, and it's fair to question it now, but it's unfair to say it doesn't exist in that form and that it was informative to the code in which we have today. So if you're within 100 feet of the North Mill Pond, I haven't changed anything with this code. You still are required to give community space because that's what the community wanted, that greenway. And these projects, granted they're under appeal, they're kind of done unless they come back because there's a problem with the court decisions. So there doesn't appear to be the impetus to spend a lot of time figuring out, okay, how do we recalibrate it? Do we now not want a greenway if they come back and we want workforce housing? That's a deeper dive, and it seemed to be way less productive at this time than saying everybody beyond 100 feet, which is the next section, has to do workforce and the community space. So that's how we got here, as imperfect as it is.
Okay.
Yes, Nick,
Hi.
I noticed that you mentioned there are 13 types of community space.
Yes.
And most of them are, there's parks, there's all kinds of baseball fields and such. But in reality, would you say the only 2 types that have been used since this was enacted are pedestrian alleyways and sidewalks?
No, we've got pocket parks, several of them. I believe there are 16 properties that have done community space, and I'm apologetic. I didn't bring my list down because I have it on my desk right now. There are at least 16 properties that have provided community space to the city. And when we get to that slide, I will answer that question better because they'll all be staring at me. But it's not just sidewalks and alleyways, that's for sure. We have greenways, we have pocket parks, there's 4, and there probably are a couple more, but
All right, I just
give me a
was
chance.
curious on that because it seems like we have a lot of variety to choose from, but very few. The actual list being used is pretty small. And my other comment on community space is that I think everyone is aware, I have a real problem with fire lanes and driveways
Dude.
being used for community space.
Huh?
That's it.
dude.
I was agreeing, exclaiming.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. And, you know,
So I don't know if that's an interpretation thing in the planning department, but
Dual use isn't community space.
yeah,
yeah,
let-
there has to be a mutual sacrifice here. That's what the whole deal to me is. The developer sacrifices for something and the city sacrifices.
Absolutely.
We benefit and the developer
exactly.
benefits.
We'll talk about it.
So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah.
that,
Let's call it a mutual benefit, not a mutual sacrifice.
Yeah, it's a benefit.
Again, it's,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? It's,
No, totally, and I want to talk about that.
just want to
Very
put that out there. That
good comment.
Yeah,
Who said that?
I'll reserve, but yeah, we'll get there.
We'll get there. Yeah, no, it's an excellent question.
Thank you.
Okay, you guys ready for the second one?
Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry, Peter, go ahead.
Hey, I just want to add on to the community space discussion. It looks like there's actual more detailed requirements in what you've provided to us in the amendments, which I like. Was that all kind of it's what's in the red in the new proposal that you provided, correct?
Yeah, you mean the amended language?
Yes.
It's in this.
Yeah.
That's all new. So that would prevent some of the community space options that have kind of been unusable, less value in the past.
No,
I'm not
no.
saying everything that's
Peter,
been provided has been like
sorry,
that, but-
Peter,
but there has been some.
I didn't mean to cut you off. I think you asked, are we proposing amendments here that are going to somehow reduce some community space types from being utilized? Something like that, right? No?
No, they're going to make them more usable, opposed to
They're
some of
go-
the community space that's been provided in the past hasn't been as usable.
I think the ones you're reading are new. Are those the ones you're looking at? Pedestrian
Yeah.
passageway, pedestrian observation, or public
Yes.
observation
Yeah.
deck?
You mean more,
yeah.
more
So we're gonna get to that
That's good, I like
Four or
it.
five.
More useful to the developer.
Yeah.
More useful by the community. Is what it means.
Yeah, so let's try and answer that, Peter, when we get to the community space, because I think, these are all conflating questions about community space and how well we calibrate that trade-off or sacrifice. And
Mutual benefit.
yeah, I was using his words. So what I think is great for you guys on a case-by-case basis, should these amendments go forward, is the planning board will be making those decisions through the conditional use permit, whether the mutual benefit or sacrifice is equitable. Right now, you don't have that opportunity because they are as of right. So don't have too much heartburn about how these things get allocated from project to project. The applicants are going to have to be here and ask you for a conditional use permit, proposition you as to which community space type they prefer for their site, and there'll be an opportunity for you to discuss whether it's a fair trade.
I want to underscore that point. That's a huge thing that's burned into this proposed amendment, is the conditional use permit expansion and planning board review and discretion over what and how things happen. That's big, and it's a change.
Yeah, and I agree. And what I really like is that because I think we need to discuss the size of the workforce. I
Sure.
see what you have in there, which we will come to, but it's the fact that it's not an optional thing, like workforce housing, either for purchase or rent, will now be baked into these deals, because I really feel like we've missed that opportunity before. No one's opted for that. No, well, they did, but then they
Well, they didn't build it,
Changed,
so,
yeah,
it
right.
didn't work. And I would only be guessing, but I think there are some serious financial problems with the code we have today that make it a very big disincentive. Not just the choice, which obviously is the easy way for us to think, that's why we're never getting workforce housing, but requiring 30% workforce housing for a sale unit to add one floor, 20% of the volume of the building, is utterly uneconomic. And we didn't really, I'll say as a participant, as you've heard me say every other time I sit here with an amendment, we didn't get it right when we wrote it. So that's a bigger part of the problem than the opting out, is that 30% it's impossible that somebody would do that. They'll stick with the 4 floors and keep the market rate and never do this. There has to be the carrot has to outweigh the stick, or it will not be an incentive. Doesn't have to outweigh it 2 to 1, 3 to 1, but it has to be greater than a 1 to 1, or there's no financial incentive for somebody to do it. Okay,
I
so,
understand that. I don't exactly understand the calculations that make that not economically viable, but that's okay.
well, let's spend 30 more seconds just to, it's worth it. Right now, you can do a 4-story building in a lot of these districts in the North End, 4 stories. So imagine a 4-story building, and there's no conditional use permit, there's no discretion,
As of
there's
right.
no community space, that's as of right, and there's no workforce housing. So the city says today, well, we'll give you a 5th floor, which is 20% more if it's the same size as the floor below, and let's just go with that. There's no step back or anything, because a lot of them do step back, so they're even smaller than the floors below. But let's make it the same so you can see them all. They're almost all a little bit smaller than the one below. But let's say it's a 1-to-1, it's 20%. So if there's 10 apartments on the first 3 floors above the commercial, so there's 30 units in there, so let's just assume 10 more fit on the top. Well, that's 40. If you have to do 30% of the 40 that are workforce housing, you're going to end up with the whole 5th floor essentially being workforce housing. And the workforce housing units are going to cost you twice or 3 times as much to build as you can sell them in that condition with a 5th floor. So that there's no economic incentive to do what we currently have on the books, and that's on us.
But Nick, that's assuming that all of the units are the same price, and
No.
No.
you
I
could
think-
go up,
No.
you can disperse those.
Here's the test. Here's the test, Jane. It hasn't happened. Nobody's elected to do it.
Yeah.
That's the real test.
I understand.
That's the market test.
You can't build it.
And
I have a zoning permit to build 30 units in Rochester right now.
Yeah,
It's a loser. It's a negative
Yes.
cash flow at current rates of construction and money.
exactly.
It's sitting
simple.
there until the world changes.
Correct.
And if
Yeah.
I could use my fire lane, which I have to build anyway, community space, boom, no brainer. I didn't sacrifice a thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. We'll come back to your fire lane.
that too.
I sense it's a hot topic. Okay, so let's go to the second one, which is the large building footprints. Yeah, I know we're not moving as fast as we wanted to, but
This
you
is
guys feel like
important.
it's productive?
This is important.
Yes.
Okay.
That's good.
It has to
I'm
be.
trying to make it move.
Definitely.
Peter, sorry, you good?
He said definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, they said definitely.
Did I miss a slide? I
great.
don't even know. Yeah, I don't.
This is correct.
Okay, so this is, again, the larger building footprints. This is the second of 3, so try not to get lost. There's 3 incentives. The first one was the overlays. The second one now we're talking about are people that are either in the overlays or outside the overlays that want to put bigger building footprints on their lot than the code allows. So what's the carrot or the incentive to this? Again, this one's a conditional use permit already. It already gives the planning board control. You are required, if you put parking on the ground floor, like the AC Hotel, to build a liner building. And we already have that in the code. A liner building simply means it's a commercial space that's at least 24 feet thick from the street that you would put businesses in, so no one has to see the cars when they walk by the parking that's at grade, like the AC Hotel. You obviously see the portal at popovers and the AC Hotel to get into that parking, but when you walk down the street on Bond Street, you can't see the parking but it's behind. They're about 36 feet, not 24, but the minimum is 24 feet in depth. And then you're required to have 30% instead of 20 community space, and again, you draw from the 13 types. So I'll give you examples. Who's used it? The AC Hotel, they did not take any extra stories. You can also, these are additive. They are in the overlay. They could have taken an extra story, and they could ask for this conditional use permit. They stopped at 5. They were allowed to go to 7, but they stopped at 5, and we won't digress, but the cost of construction beyond 5, you need to go to 8 to start making money again, because it's steel and concrete, because the way they build these buildings is cost-effective at podium construction up to 5 floors. We learned that by doing, not by knowing, meaning so they simply came in for the conditional use permit, the AC, and that's them there, and they have a 40,000 square foot footprint with cars on the ground and 1 story up in that C-shaped building.
And can we talk about their community space?
No, not right now.
Okay.
In just a second. Yeah, all of these, their community, well, the community space here were the two, they have I haven't got a project in front of you to show you, but there's a passageway along the back, and then the passageway next to 3S Art Space, and then there's about 3/4 of an acre here that was deeded for the Greenway. So the Greenway will go all the way from Market Street using 53 Green along, this is all from the AC, and then from the AC behind Rains out to Maplewood. So that was their community space. Sorry,
Okay,
Jane, gave it
but
to you.
Because I've been over there looking at it, and I guess I was under the impression that it would be immediately active community space.
Oh.
It's brambles and.
Can't be, because we gotta, the reason it isn't, and this is to our collective detriment, because people are feeling jaded, because they think when they see the weeds and the briar and the bramble, that's all we're getting. That's not what we're getting. We got the land, we got design money, that all has to be permitted. It's a separate project. A greenway covers here in this location 4 different properties. So we need to design it across 4 properties, permit it across 4 properties, and then build it across 4 properties. And one of the things we'd like to do moving forward, better than we've done in the past, and Rick has brought this up at the Land Use Committee, and it's not new, but not enough people are talking about it, is finding a way through that conditional use permit, which we didn't have here, except for AC, for this large footprint. We need a way for the planning board to make sure we get enough funding and enough momentum going to actually build these things faster. Because I think the one thing we learned is we got the land and we got some design money, and that was all we got. So we've got construction costs, and we've done a better job at Rains than we did at AC, because we're learning as we go where the gaps are. Go ahead.
Can't forget the maintenance costs.
Well, of course.
That's all, that's
Yeah,
all.
yeah.
Because these are all wonderful.
Where do you work?
These are wonderful, no, that's why I can't forget it, the wonderful.
Fire lane and maintenance over here.
So Nick,
Out of your salary, we're
Nick,
good.
what current timeline are we on for that Greenway community space around the AC?
I'll give you the answer on the 15th, because Peter
Okay.
Britz is in charge of that project.
Okay.
You don't know, right?
No, but I know he's been working
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah. So good question. Okay, so the other two real quick are the brick market. The brick market over here, they used the large building footprints. They put the police station with the Bank of America building at 3 Pleasant and the parking lot together, because Mark owns all 3. He pooled them together. He had more than an acre. He qualified for the conditional use. All those alleyways that he built from the streets that went back there, the alleys that were vehicular, that are now pedestrian, that's the community space that was provided all around the former police station and those buildings. But that was that one, and it required a conditional use permit from the planning board. And then 160 Court Street, they needed that to build the size of footprint that the Portsmouth Housing Authority has in their 64-unit building. The Portsmouth Housing Authority also was a 1-acre parcel for the next section and got the extra story that way. Okay, so those 3 are examples of who's used it. Try and get it to advance. There we go. So I didn't bother guessing who might use it in the future. That's kind of hard. So the next slide is what are the changes. So what we're proposing to change here is that projects provides both community space and workforce housing. And I will tell you, when I drafted this, I had a third option for workforce housing, thinking of projects like the Brick Market, which actually have no housing. What I had drafted in here was an in lieu payment. So somebody that does a commercial-only project would still pay, in my mind, or our minds, till it was removed under legal review, pay their fair share towards workforce housing, even if it's somewhere else. So we had an in lieu payment requirement here that would have required a project like the one on the screen for the Brick Market to provide financial support for workforce housing elsewhere because they're not doing any housing. So I think you're going to find me come back on the 15th with an amendment to what I did, because if the in lieu payment can't come back, and the legal department's still looking at it, but if it doesn't come back, we need to keep this at 30% and not drop it to 10, because we need as much as we at least get today. Yeah?
I can update you on that. It's not going to be able to come back right away. You're going
All
to
right.
have to give me more time because I have a lot more work to do.
Fine.
But I am working towards it.
So I'm going to come back with another amendment on the 15th to go back to 30% for projects that don't have housing. Sorry, Greg, go ahead.
No,
We got it.
push it
Yeah,
hard.
yeah.
because that's how, Martha's Vineyard, there's a land trust that is
Yeah.
funded by the fees.
Yes.
That buys,
Massachusetts is a lot easier, but we're working
that
on
buys
it.
vacant land to create
Yeah,
subsidized workforce housing.
exactly.
Vail, Colorado, same thing. There are fees that go in to pay for purchasing land that the city doesn't already own. We've already talked about the 200 parcels.
Yep.
But there's land out there that people would sell to us that we could build housing on.
Agreed.
So-
If we can find a way to make it work, is a consensus that we should try to do
Well,
that? I think we
but
should.
Instead of starting from scratch, look to other places.
We don't, well, we did that.
Massachusetts law is different. That's
Yeah.
the thing.
Try Colorado.
Well, so the point is, Greg, we're working on it because we're in full agreement with you. So I think the question to the rest of you is, do you feel like Greg and we feel that we've got to keep digging deeper to figure out how we can have in lieu payments for projects that don't have housing?
Yes.
I don't know.
And that's whatever you call in lieu payments. There are
To a trust,
fees,
yep.
fees into a land trust or
Impact
something
fees,
to that effect.
whatever.
Impact-
Yeah.
Well, impact fees, Dover's doing it big time. Sewer
Right.
and water impact fees. I mean, that's funding a lot of stuff.
We're working on whether it qualifies as one of those.
There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Andrew, dude.
I like it.
Yeah, so I definitely see where Greg is coming from, and I absolutely think it's a worthwhile cause to look into, and I've seen it done in other cities. Then arises the question of, okay, if you have these developers paying in lieu payments, and these developers will qualify them as capable, it then becomes a question of, well, do we enlist these developers to also begin thinking about doing these developments as well as whatever else they are doing in town to make those payments, right? So it doesn't always have to be a City of Portsmouth venture. It could be a public-private partnership where the city has funds, this developer has funds, or is paying funds into this trust, and at that point then becomes a public-private partnership, which I think incentivizes both parties to look at it in a more comprehensive way and then actually follow through on it. Because if we just collect all this money in a pool,
Yeah.
and then we go out and do research, it could take a very, very long time, whereas developers have more resources and allocation of time where they can go and do these and execute these things on a much faster rate because they are real estate
Right.
developers, they're not a municipality.
So fully agree, and that's the way we set it up, that money would go into a trust, and the trust would be able to allocate it however the trust is allowed to allocate it, to the housing authority, to a private developer, do it themselves. All those things are what normally trusts do all across the country, so all those things are possible. Once we get through the hoop of whether we can legally require this payment into a trust.
And the
which-
numbers have to be right, because the city used to have an in lieu payment for parking, and all it did was stifle development. So we have to be
Yeah,
careful about
yeah,
that.
it's like our 30%
And you
doesn't work.
Sorry, and
Yeah.
you certainly don't want to create this prohibitive nature of like, hey, this is what we're doing. So yes, the cost value to the developer, but at the same time, I do think that the headline reads, "City in collaboration with XYZ developer is bringing this more affordable housing product to the market by way of this trust." And so, structuring it and so that there's not like this too bad of a cross-pollination, if that makes sense, or like
Well, all that is
conflict of interest.
sort of outside the scope of what we're doing here, but it's
Yeah,
on
I
point
get
that
it.
we got to
Noted.
solve that.
Noted,
Yeah.
noted.
Yeah.
Jim had a question.
Tires.
Yeah, Nick, I just want to emphasize
that wasn't working.
this payment idea. It's really good. I hope it works, but it may work in Massachusetts, Colorado, but from what little I know, New Hampshire's laws are much different with impact fees. And I've looked at Dover's schedule. If you've seen Dover's schedule, it splices out the impact of development into roads, water, sewer, schools, recreation.
Yep.
And what ends up happening is that industrial and commercial get off real easy because they don't have kids. And so Dover's impact fee really hits residential hard, because as soon as you have kids in school, that's where the tax burdens hit. And single-family homes in Dover get whacked for like 10 or 15 grand a unit.
Yep.
So I just want to let everyone know that New Hampshire's a different
Just a
animal
point
with
of
regard to impact
clarification,
fees.
an in lieu is different than an impact fee. There's a difference.
There's a
You know,
difference.
impact fees are associated with growth management ordinances. That's a whole separate process, and I know we have a member who's been looking into that. But an in lieu is different. That's, the numbers still have to make sense.
Yeah, they have to make
work.
sense. Nashua has some form of in lieu of payment for workforce housing. So we're close to solving that. It just might not get solved in this round.
It's
but
not
it-
solved tonight.
No, it's not gonna be solved tonight, no.
It's gonna be a longer road. Give me,
Okay,
I say, give me
so-
a year and I might have that answer.
So we're still on the second one here, guys. What's being proposed here is that projects that want larger building footprints, whether it's the Brick Market or the AC Hotel, neither of which have housing, would be required to have both. So we're going to have to keep the 30% for projects like those because they don't even have housing, so they can't provide it. Okay, so I think we're moving to the third part. I reversed them. So these are just a wild guess at future projects that might be affected by this amendment, both the existing and proposed. 361 Hanover is a big footprint. This is in the wrong spot again because of the size of the map. But 124 Bartlett Street is the maker space. That's a big footprint. That could possibly be impacted. Citizen Bank over here, and obviously the McIntyre. Those are all potential projects that could be impacted by this amendment today and tomorrow. Yes, sir.
And there's a statute, that landowners can combine parcels.
Yes.
That's not something the city has any jurisdiction over. So if you have 2 half-acre parcels and you combine them if you own them, you can do that, and then they would qualify. I don't,
So we're going to that one next. I know it says large building, but the next one's large parcels.
it says parcels.
That's your tag tonight, is the large parcel. Okay, here we are, Rick. So the density incentive in part 3 of 3 is for large parcels, over 1 acre. And Rick's right. You can create more than an acre by buying your neighbor and attaching it to yourself. That's what Mark did with the Brick Market, right?
said that, 3
And-
parcels.
And that's what Rains Ave did with Vanguard and the De Lorenzo pieces where the cleaners are. So it's possible these things can change over time. Okay, so what's the existing density incentive for large, what the hell? I went the wrong way. Building footprints again. I want to back up and see what's up with that title. This is the wrong word. It's not larger building footprints, it's larger parcels. I'm surprised that's like
The
that.
heading's just wrong.
Yeah, sorry about it.
The details are correct.
But I caught it. So.
Parcels are in every word, yeah.
Yeah, the carrots and sticks are correct here. What do you get if you're in 1 acre? You have to be outside the north or west end overlay district. So if you're 2 Russell Street and you're more than an acre, you can't use this. But if you're the McIntyre, the Citizen Bank, I'll show you the list, there's a lot of them, and you're outside the overlay districts, what can you do? This is as of right again, Jane, it's not a conditional use permit for today. You can get an extra story of height in exchange for 20% community space. Again, as of right. No, hey, can I do this? No, you have a right to do it. So that's the existing code, not, all right, so here, who's used it? Only the Portsmouth Housing Authority has used this so far at 160 Court Street. Again, they used the large building footprint for the underground parking and the bigger building, and they also used it for the extra story of height because they're in a lower height district than the building that was built. So that just shows you it has been used, but it's sparingly used. These are all the properties that are over 1 acre that are outside the north and west and overlay districts. And we got 101 Chapels, St. John's, that's not just the church and the cemetery, they own all that parking all the way down to Daniel. If you put all those together, it's over an acre. The McIntyre, 62 Daniel, 143 Pleasance, the Citizen Bank, 361 Hanover's Heinemann, 124 the Maker Space. The Hill is actually more than an acre. Obviously, there's nothing that's likely to happen there, but I'm just tagging properties, whether they're developable or not. They're more than 1 acre. 501 Islington Street is the bank down there. I can't remember the name of the bank, down near Dunkin' Donuts. It's more than an acre. Partners. 16 Court is the Baptist Church. 500 Market is Noble's Island. That's all on one lot. It's more than an acre. And 235 Maplewood is the right at the top of the map on the left. It's the property in the North Mill Pond that's, I think, a condominium with 4 units called Jackson Point. It's on 1.3 acres. So all those would qualify. I was actually surprised when I did the analysis how many I didn't know were there, given this has been on the books since 2015. Okay, so all these are potentially affected, and that's without mergers. so it would be more. Yeah, this list is actually 18 that are over, so I just took, I think, the top 8 in the previous slide. You can see all that, you've already got access to this, so you can read that in your own time, the list of 16. So what are we proposing to do here? Because this is the most substantive change, I think, of the 3 incentive districts we've got. Number one, we don't want it to be as of right. We want a conditional use permit. So whether it's a fire lane or a rooftop deck, you guys can have that conversation yourselves with the applicant when you dole out or not the conditional use permit. You don't have to worry about whether it's right or not. You'll figure it out yourselves. Number two, the required project, it's requiring all projects to provide both community space and workforce housing. Again, a bit of a snag here if you have a project that has no housing. So I'm still going to probably fix this too, because that other thing disappeared at the last minute, the in lieu. Number three, we're going to have to recalibrate the numbers. You can't require somebody to provide the same level of community space and then say, and you've got to give us, hundreds of thousands of dollars of workforce housing subsidy. It has to be better calibrated. I'm not going to sit here and argue. We aren't going to come back and play with the numbers a little more as we learn how it goes. It can't be a disincentive, exactly. So if we're doing the best we can, we probably will continue to monitor this and change those numbers till we get it right, because it's not easy in a marketplace that's so variable depending on your distance to Market Square. Number four, these are considerations that are in the slide, but they're, you don't see it reflected in the code when you see what we drafted. There, on that list of 16, there are at least 4 or 5 civic properties like the Moffett Ladd, like the Langdon House, like the Baptist Church, that shouldn't really be in this, like we went through a year ago with the building height. So I would advocate when we come back on the 15th, that come out. And we only have this be applicable in the CD4, CD5, and CD4W, which is the makerspace out in the West End. And get rid of the civic properties, get rid of that Jackson Point property that's residential right on the over in a residential neighborhood, and probably ditch the bank on Islington because it's kind of an outlier as well. But we can talk about that. I think the focus here should be more the CD4 and CD5 and the CD4W, the more densely developed areas. Because remember, we're allowing taller buildings with this conditional use permit and bigger buildings, so it can have a real impact on the abutters. Was never intended to be on Islington Street. And then I think we should consider when we come back on the 15th, adding a carrot to allow the potential for small-scale redevelopment to occur on any of these larger parcels. Like, just give you an example to think about. Think about the Citizen Bank property being sold and somebody redeveloping the property. That's the old A&P. Right now, that is a 35-foot district, 3 stories, right? They would be able, with this permit, to go 45 feet and 4 stories. And that's going to really start competing in maybe a not-so-good way with the small-scale buildings on the corner of Court and Pleasant, and the Langdon House across the road, and the Captain Thompson House. So I think it's worth considering when we come back, just so you're not surprised. I'm still noodling it and talking to Rick and others. I could envision, at least as a scenario, if the Citizen Bank property was ever redeveloped, that you could have almost another hill there, like the Hill, with a lot of little buildings put together with shared space. Right now, you could not do that without a dozen variances. So it's something to consider. I don't want to get sidetracked, but that's what that means when I put number 5 on the sheet.
One clarification on the first point. Nick said we could negotiate whatever on the fire lane. If we have these criteria with 16 or however many types of community space we have listed as allowable community spaces, we don't have as much negotiation about those if they're provided. If a fire lane or something else is the problem, we should look at that in the definitions. But I wouldn't exclude fire lanes altogether, because there are fire lanes and there are fire lanes. I've actually designed some that are like Grasscrete, going behind a building where the fire truck can go, but you wouldn't know it because it's got grass growing through there, and people walk over it and they have a good time. So, I can think of some that aren't like that, but
Well,
My issue gets to a fire lane's gonna be required anyway.
Right.
What is the sacrifice of developer who's using what he has to do anyway for
Let me
community
take a
space? This is where I have a problem. It has to be mutual benefit, mutual sacrifice. And
So-
that's where I'm heading with.
That's a definitional issue.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to pile on, Jim, but it's come back up, so I'm gonna try and answer it a different way. Because similar way to Rick. When I look at Chestnut Street was a street I would never photograph before they turned it into a shared street. I'd rarely use it if I'm walking down Congress Street. An inordinate amount of money went into Chestnut Street becoming a pedestrian street that cars can use in front of the music hall, with all that granite, all those pavers. It's a really cool experience to me, and it cost somebody a fortune to not just slap some asphalt down so a fire truck could go up there, but actually turn it into a place that, God forbid, the fire truck needs to go up there, but they can go up there. And I think shared streets, where we're talking about Haven Court, Ladd Street, and High Street with the project that we looked at last year, you're talking about $2, $3, $4 million of upgrades from pavement, curbing, and something you rarely would photograph, let alone walk down the middle of the street. So I'd like to think one of the community space types that we haven't yet added that I'd actually like to bring back for discussion on the 15th is a shared street. Because if you're going to have somebody willing to spend $2 or $3 million building a street that's made for pedestrians that cars occasionally use, it's probably worth looking at. You still can say no, but it's a mistake in my mind to say, we're going to say no 100% of the time, so we're going to say it's
It's a
ineligible.
multifunctional community space.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
It's not just a street, it's not just a.
Yeah, I agree. I don't, the world's not black and white, and there are situations where it may be appropriate, like the Chestnut Street, but there are places where I think it's being abused, and it has been abused, where it was never meant to be a nice community space. It was meant to be a hidden away fire lane back alley that, hey, we can use this for community space as an afterthought. And they get all the goods, and the city gets, the scraps. So that's
Well,
what I'm trying to,
It's,
that's
I
what I'm
think
trying
it's,
to
it's a
avoid.
valid, you raise a valid point, and it's something that needs to be looked at in the definitions, I think, because I think your point is, if you have space the developer can't use for anything because of a power line or because of some other reason that they can't use it, is it fair for that to count as credit towards additional development? That's your point. I get it.
Yeah, and I think you're going to find as you do your jobs with a conditional use permit, you'll do your job differently. It's not that you're going to say, I don't want that because there's a power line easement over it, and I don't want a greenway because somehow it's undevelopable. But you remember, these numbers that are in this code are the minimum, not the maximum. And most of these projects that are coming in with community space greatly exceed the minimum. And if some of that community space is somehow in anyone's mind or collectively impaired with a environmental concern or constraint or an easement, you're going to weigh it differently and say, okay, maybe it's 40% on this property because half of what you're giving us is completely undevelopable or not that nice. So you're going to have that ability to triage and decide
Got to
whether.
be careful about that. There's a lot of discretion with conditional use permits, whether it goes that far. I think we have to craft it to allow that kind of discretion. Depending on the quality of the community space, the board could require up to 40%, something like that. You'd have to say that in the
Well,
ordinance to be able to do it.
I understand, yes,
But
but.
we can talk about,
yeah,
that's into
well,
the weeds.
But that's no different than saying 30% is all that matters, and it doesn't matter which community space type you choose. You're going to have a certain degree of latitude to even
Yes.
decide which community space you're using in the 30. So it's not it's a minimum number. It doesn't mean it's the ceiling, was my point.
Okay, Jane, and then Andrew, and then Joe.
Well, I was you actually just said it, because moving this to a CUP decision is a big shift, a big positive shift, I think. I hope that there is language. I don't know, you said that there are 13 types of community spaces, so I haven't seen it. I mean,
Coming.
It's the next,
It's probably.
Next section.
It's a good segue.
Yeah.
Yeah, but somewhere in the description of those 16 community spaces should be, I don't know, at least examples or something about what we mean about shared, streets and that kind of thing. And it should have the environment in consideration also, because I don't know, is under the arch, are those like porous pavers there? Like, is that great drainage, or, it's not just about fire lanes. There's other,
You're going to get all that in site plan review in respect to whether the site is, because that's still required, the site plan review
Yeah,
that you'll
yeah,
be
yeah.
doing. But, we're not going to be as prescriptive to porous pavement and not in the
This is
community
zoning,
space
this
type,
is
yeah.
zoning, that's site plan.
So you'll get that in your process.
Andrew.
Yeah, I think to dovetail and to summarize, I think what Jim is feeling and saying, because I also had that immediate comment of Russell Street, is when you label it as community space, I would say 99.9% of the community is not driving a fire truck. So to also label it as a fire lane is a competing concept for community space. And community takes place largely at the pedestrian level for all of these, almost all of the 13 uses. So, or all of the 13 community space uses. So if that is the label of community space, it should be an overwhelming percentage that you're not using a fire truck. You're interacting with this community space in a pedestrian way that makes more intrinsic sense.
Yep.
That's a change in the ordinance. I think what Nick is saying is instead of having a gravel fire lane that's beside a railroad track, perhaps it should have some sort of special pavement treatment.
Yeah, the design iteration, I absolutely agree
Well,
with,
that's
because
what happened
you
over
can
there.
achieve both.
It isn't a gravel or a paved area. It's all pavers that move back there on that particular project. And it's actually not a community space type, a fire lane. Chestnut Street, nobody walks around Portsmouth saying Chestnut Street, it's just a fire lane. But it is a fire lane. Fire lanes are places that are required for fire access.
Well,
But
mind you,
it's rarely
Chestnut-
going to be used for that.
Chestnut Street does extend to that the smaller
yeah.
residential, which has been
Right, but no one calls it a fire lane.
No.
It's called a pedestrian shared street. It's a street for pedestrians, so.
It's a cool space. Joe?
The image you have on the screen here now, Nick, we're all familiar with it. Are these planned to be fire access as well?
They actually are fire
So
access,
here's a great
but
example.
we don't call them
of
fire lanes.
Okay, but we don't, right, okay, they're not labeled
Yeah.
fire lanes, but they are,
They function as fire lanes.
they function as, okay, good. Well, then it goes back to what you said, there are fire lanes and there are fire lanes, so sometimes they're done wonderfully, and it's just a matter of,
Right.
of us being able to keep an eye on the design of them, not
Right.
just the,
Right,
Yep,
yeah.
okay.
good catch.
Peter, do you have anything up there?
No, thank
Okay.
you. This is all great, and I
Okay.
appreciate all the direction you're giving us here. It's helpful.
All right, thank you, Peter. There we go. Okay, community space types, here we are. So Jane, forgive me, the 13th one I didn't put because there is one more. It's not the, what is it? Peter Stith, help me out on the last one if you can. So again, there's park, greenways, you're closer to the screen, the pedestrian alley, the wide pedestrian sidewalks, squares, plazas, pocket parks, playgrounds, recreational. I mean,
Courtyard.
we got pickleball courts out at Cinemagic, that's another type. The common or green, community gardens, the outdoor dining, we have that. Probably half of those are used,
Courtyard.
so it's not like.
the last one's pretty relevant.
Courtyard.
Yeah, thanks, in the courtyard. We are proposing to add at least two, and I'm thinking two more might come. The shared street might come, at least for conversation next meeting. Sorry, I got three I've added here. I haven't got the thing open in front of me. It's the next slide.
Yeah,
Yes. Pedestrian passageway, and apologies for the drawings. I had to sort of play with the existing images in the code to get this far. But if you look and you squint, a pedestrian passageway, and if any of you have been to Newburyport, these are a dime a dozen off State Street in Newburyport, but they're tunnels that take you through the building to another community space in behind, like In Street in Newburyport. So they're awesome, yeah.
Sick, yeah.
And they should be, so we're creating a definition, and this is something you could choose from, and we give a minimum width, not a maximum, but a minimum. And then, this is a public observation deck. So it's, again, this came out of the McIntyre, community plan, the idea of having a public, observation deck on the roof. You'd clearly have to have public access to get to it, whether elevators and stairs, that would be part of the community space, but that's.
Didn't we add one of these to, well,
Martingale.
it was already there on Martingale, on the left-hand side.
Oh, yeah, that one would, yes, and, Greg, good point, because I thought of that, and I did add deck, yeah, that's right, I did that already myself. Boardwalk and, yeah, waterfront deck, thank you. That's why I did that.
Martingale.
Martingale, yeah, and I put that word in there, because the image shows you something on the roof, but the definition also says it can be a waterfront boardwalk. So good, yes, dude.
I'm wondering, so I definitely agree with all these, and I know that I agree with all the others, but then we find ourselves competing with like fire, life safety, or building code. And the direct example that I can think of, but not many others may think of, would be at McKinnon's Plaza. They redid the end cap when they built the Viridian Apartments, and they made that end cap with garage doors in the intent to have like indoor, outdoor, al fresco dining. And then the city said, no, you can't put tables there because you can't serve alcohol outside. And so that was like a competing code issue. So might be too narrow of an example, but just thinking of that.
Okay, hadn't thought of that.
So this bottom one, this
Yeah.
pedestrian arcade one is.
Yeah, it's a
really-
lousy drawing, but it's
Well,
awesome.
But that actually, it's funny, if you've been to Verona in Italy, that's how
Yeah,
Verona was
the
built.
whole city.
The whole city are these pedestrian arcades, and it was specifically so building owners could build higher buildings.
Right.
Back then, so it's
And we used to
amazing.
have a couple of buildings like that on Market Square that are long since gone.
Yeah.
With arcades and arches, and the railroad station had arches, that was on Maplewood where Wells Fargo is. The 4664 Maplewood has an arcade under 50% of the facade, so it gives you a sense, and it's really awesome. Get out of the
Move
weather.
Verona and stay out. If it's
Outdoor
pouring rain,
dining.
You're dry the whole time, you're in the shade the whole time, it's really
Yeah.
great.
So the idea here is to try and just think of other cool public spaces that somebody can consider and bring to the planning board for that conditional use permit. And so I would like to propose for the 15th, we have a shared street option, which is an upgraded street, like a Chestnut Street, pedestrian street. And, any other ideas people might have? Rick?
If we call them community amenities, I think that might open a window to think about a little bit, and Nick and I are thinking about it.
The only thing that it does still disturb me is, so the buildings are built, the developers got their extra square feet or their extra floors, but the community doesn't, it doesn't know that this is community space, it doesn't know that a greenway is coming, that a community space is coming, that it is to be built. Seems to me like if it's not open when the building is open, that there should be some kind of signage because there is no consciousness, well, I'm not going to say no, I'm just going to say there's very low consciousness. So people see all these buildings be built and they don't know, and I think timeline is an important question. And I think it needs to be sooner rather than later that we actually get the benefit for the community from these trade-offs.
So I think that is an excellent observation, because I'm one of the guys that goes out and makes sure when the community space is built, it's built. And there's a lot out there that's built, but it's not always inviting. So your point is well taken. You look at 145 Maplewood, there's a pocket park on the corner, all those granite steps go up to the grass goes up to a seat wall. You feel like you're trespassing when you go on that space because there's no sign indicating we have a public easement for it. All the walkway from the AC Hotel, that big wide walkway, that's a public walkway.
That
And we
really
should
bothers
definitely
me.
have some signage. Obviously, all of McNabb stuff, people know is a public walkway to go between the RERA to the new building. That'll be more obvious, but signage would be really good, because we're struggling, obviously, when our own people, which is boards like yours, feel like we're getting gypped when we're doing these trades. It's important for us as staff to remember that as you guys come and go over time, everybody comes and goes over time. We need signage out there, because the Greenway, it takes many years to put in place.
It'd be good PR at a
Yeah,
minimum.
that's a good idea.
People need to know.
That's a great comment that Jane made, and it speaks to the need for us to promote it. The city has to promote it, right? We can't
Right.
expect the developers to promote it after it's done.
And you can't count on the
But they'll
Herald.
put the
Right,
sign-
so,
Can't
so
count
why
on the
don't,
Herald to accurately
imagine
report
imagine if there were, for a promoter,
that.
say, explore Portsmouth alleys and parks, and it was actually a promoted, campaign.
We need a
For-
community space
Yeah.
sign program, because
Or a map.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something.
You can also put
But-
signs in the pavement. And those-
Exactly.
those are-
I think it should include that it will be here, it will be
Coming soon.
completed by the timeline. Because, no, I do. I
What's the
think there
implementation?
From a
needs to be
developer
pressure.
standpoint, that's
Yeah,
impossible
well-
because things change.
Yeah, well-
You can't put a timeline on it.
Yeah,
How about approximately?
okay, but
Within
point
a
well
certain
taken. We
period of
need to
time.
know where it is and what it's supposed to be when it's done.
We actually required signs on Martingale.
Yeah, we should here.
It was part of our, remember, Martin? Yeah.
All right, so those three types are in your packet. There may be one or two more added to that for the next meeting. Okay, try, there we go. We're almost done, okay? You want to go back?
I thought this would be a good time, before we go on to the next segment, I just want to reiterate my stance. I'm pretty stubborn about this, but I really am set into my mind about the concept of mutual sacrifice on these incentives and the bonuses. So my best example is 2 Russell Street. Because in my mind, that project would look exactly the same, whether it was a 4-story project or 5-story. Nothing changed. They had to build a fire lane, and we gave them credit for community space. They had to build the separation. They got a pocket park in there. So again, they got an extra story, but the project would have looked back exactly the same at 4 stories.
So I would just say, I think, be careful with that, because what will look the same is, or similar, because we don't know for sure, but I'm going to give you that point. You'd probably have a similar volume and similar spacing, but the quality of the space in front, between, and behind the buildings would not at all be similar. And I think that's a pretty safe bet. Nobody's doing Chestnut Street pavers behind that for simply a fire lane because they don't have to. There's just no way that wouldn't have been black asphalt from one end to the other.
I'll give you that point. I'll give you
So
that point.
so that quality assurance, though, that's what the good news is, if you do the conditional use permit, Jim and anybody else that's sitting here over time is going to have the ability to assess whether the trade is fair and equitable when you're looking at the project, where today you don't have that leverage. It's as of right. So that's the most meaningful thing we're doing here, is giving people like you the ability to fetter that out case by case and argue the point and see where the majority of the board comes up with and go with it.
Yeah, I'm kind of stuck on the fire lane thing. So what you're saying is that instead of a gravel or paved
Yeah.
fire lane,
Yep.
if we throw pavers down,
And
it should
connect-
qualify as community space.
And to connect it to all the interconnected community space that's on the project. What could be worse on 2 Russell than walking between the 3 buildings in these park areas with granite and pavers, and getting to the back of the building and it's simply a traditional fire lane, versus a Chestnut Street finish, which is what it's got in respect to the pavers. There's a pavement pattern that goes all along the back of that building. It's not the Taj Mahal, but what's important is to draw people in between those buildings and not force them at the end of Port Walk Place to go between the buildings and then have to walk all the way back. You want them to be able to go left and right, get out to Maplewood, go around to the 3 Essard space. So I'm not suggesting, Jim, it's perfect, but I think it might be better than you think it is, and we'll all know better when it's built. 'Cause-
More importantly, we're talking about a change, a whole new process that would address that. It's called a conditional use permit. There are conditions that can be attached to make sure certain things happen. And as Nick just said, if a majority of the board feels you convince them, or, we talk about it as a group, that it needs to be a certain way, that can be a requirement. And if it's too much for the developer, they might change and eliminate that and do something else.
Yeah.
That's the back and forth. And Joe, you had a
And
question?
the other thing that makes those spaces unique is not just the quality of them, but the fact that they're actually deeded.
Oh, yeah, it's all deeded. Community space has to be deeded, yeah. Yeah, with permanent, and they can't gate this stuff off because the people that move in don't
That's-
like us.
That's big.
Yeah.
That's big,
Yeah.
that it's actually
Permanent.
deeded
Yeah.
permanent.
Permanent deeded space.
Yeah.
Happened on State Street.
Right, like State Street. Okay, so let's just hop into the, almost get done here, and then open it up. Building footprint exemption for community space. Okay, I talked about this at the beginning. The images are all the same, so don't get stuck on those. They're just riding through each of the parts. So here are two examples. They're not from Portsmouth, but they could be, where you've got parking underneath both of those images. Post Office Square on the right, I'm not even sure where the one on the left is, but there's parking underneath it. That was the caption. So you've got a formal hardscape square on the left or plaza, and you've got this sort of park-like plaza on the right. Well, if you walk up in Portsmouth, if you're more than 18 inches above grade, which is only 3 steps, so 3 granite steps, think of the end of 145 Maplewood, that's 3 steps. You get on the grass on 145 Maplewood at the corner of Rains, on that new building. You go up the 3 steps, all of a sudden, that all counts as building footprint, even though there's grass on it, and then a seat wall, and then a hedge, and then another patio. In Portsmouth, the building is measured from anything 18 inches or above grade. So what I'm suggesting we consider here is exempting elevated underground parking that has qualified community space on top of it. So, because clearly at Post Office Square, you'd look at the building on the right-hand side with all the trees. In Portsmouth, that would be counted as a building because the parking's underneath it and it's higher than 18 inches sticking out of the ground, and you have to walk up 3, 4, 5 steps to get into that park on top of the parking. But that's not a building, and we shouldn't create the disincentive. You know, the McIntyre community plan made it obvious when we wanted this market hall looking up at the church. Well, you have to go up 10 steps to get onto it. Well, the whole thing's a building, there's parking under it. So we want to create, I think, an exemption to the building footprint for park space that sits on top. That's uncovered, not in a passageway or in a greenhouse, but open community space like this.
Makes sense, but to what height? Did you say?
Any height, as long as there's no, why would it?
Well,
why
at some
would-
point,
Again, it's a conditional use permit if it's absurd what comes to you, and there's 80 steps to get on the top of it.
Well, yeah, but at some point, it does become more of a building because
Well, yeah.
it starts to have a facade rather than
Sure.
what looks like a retaining wall.
Yeah.
I think great idea. There must be a threshold that a trigger.
We'll make
would-
it 10 feet or something, I don't know.
Well,
I mean,
Well, does a
Well,
roof,
10
does a
feet's a
rooftop,
full floor of a building, so.
yeah, because the rooftop is,
I love the example that you've provided. and
Your
that's-
example's
that's-
great, but
that's
we don't want
3
somebody to
feet.
take advantage of it.
It's
I
3
understand.
it's 3
So
feet.
I want
let's
an
all think about
observation
that for
deck.
the 15th, okay?
Yeah, yeah.
Point well taken.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, maximum height, question.
Is there a maximum square footage that could be applied to?
Hopefully not. Why wouldn't you want either of those to be as big as they could possibly be?
Yeah, it's like kind of a reverse question, I suppose, phrased poorly, but obviously we want that. I don't know. What is the equation of it? So if someone says, hey, I'll put underground parking, but I'm going to make this small allocation corner of raised community space.
So if the rest of the underground parking had no community space on top of it, that's kind of hard to imagine. If it wasn't a building, it's typically going to be community space on top of an underground parking. It's either a building or it's community space. It's hard to imagine something other than that. But let's just say half that image on the left was vents, just a grill that you
Yeah.
couldn't really walk on. It had a ledge. You wouldn't count it as community space, so it would count as a building. They're not going to do it. We've created a disincentive for them to not do community space on top of underground parking that doesn't have a building on top of it, like part of the community plan for the McIntyre. So it's a great way to get what we want and allow it to happen without needing a variance because it's above 18 inches when you get on the park.
In this case, is there a definition for what makes underground? Because I just keep thinking of the one there by where Wells Fargo is, they couldn't go down because of the water table. So if you went down halfway and came up halfway, now you have underground parking with a garden on top.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
It does, and I think, I'm not sure it really matters. I mean, I think of the community plan, right, for the McIntyre, it's just one that's stuck in my mind.
Well, when Joe was asking the question, what's the height limit, I would think that the height limit has to go from grade. Because if you can
No,
go
correct.
down 8 feet and up 2,
No,
you
right.
got a one-story garage. But if you can only go down 1 and up 9, now you got a one-story garage. So it's a
Well,
good
no,
question.
we already have a definition for that. 50% below grade, if you're more than 50% below grade, you're a basement. You aren't a story above grade.
Didn't know that.
So we
Thank you.
already have that.
Didn't know, thank you.
But I think, and I don't know the answer, and it's on my list to come back, but again, a good project that I've spent a lot of time on is the community plan for the McIntyre, and I think we have a solid 10, 12 steps to get up on the plaza, which is gonna be 6, 7 feet above grade. So we'll figure out, it's probably 10 feet or something would be the maximum you'd want, but I gotta work on that and look at other stuff. It's a great question. Okay, can we,
Last
wanna
section.
go?
Last section.
Working.
6.
Trying to get the move. Okay, so this one is obviously targeted, right? This is a small area. It's the south side of Bow Street, and we all know what it abuts. I'll get my other one here. So what is the existing building? So I'll back up. You guys all know it, but we have a building height map, and this is it for all the character districts with these different colors that go with this legend over here. Okay, so we got a blow up of where that arrow is on Bow Street. Bow Street's right here. The circle goes around the area, the oval that we're proposing to change. This orange line, which is what it is today, is 3 to 4 stories or 45 feet is what you can build on this portion. It includes the bottom portion of the McIntyre as well as this multifamily house next door. That's that block between Chapel and Penn Hollow. And the green line around here is 3 stories or 40 feet today. So most of the block is 3 stories, 40 feet. Bow Street does have a higher context and a higher existing building heights than Daniel, Penn Hollow, or Chapel, which is why it's only a 5-foot difference between the orange and the green. We went through this all on Congress Street. We're going the opposite direction here, though.
We're going to go down.
And I'll tell you why I think it's not inappropriate to do so in relation to how this property here might get developed in the future. Right now, this is a parcel that's 2.2 acres. It qualifies for the 1 acre density incentive from earlier in the conversation. So if you look at the 45 feet that the orange is and the 40 feet that the green is, it's actually 55 feet and 50 feet as of right with the existing code. And I've got that written up on the left. So let me just go to the next slide for what's proposed. So there's your look up Bow Street on the south and the north side. And you can see, these are pretty tall buildings, the Martingale all through here. There is one stubby building in here, but everything is like 3, 4, and even 5 stories down here.
And the stubby building on the other.
45 feet's pretty typical, and they're 70 feet on the backside, but they're 40 to 45 here, which is why we did that originally on this side. But this building here is only about 28 feet, minus the grade, the
on a hill.
first story above grade. It's still in the low 30s to the midpoint of that roof. Now, that's an outlier. It's a very different building form than what you see on that side. So there's always been an open question. What do you do over here? What's the right height? Some people feel like it should be really low. Some people want to park, blah, blah, blah. So all we're proposing to do for now is lower it so the whole block is green, which is simply a 5-foot reduction. Because if we go back to the incentive is going from 10 feet increase to 15 increase, which gets you right back where you started on Bow Street. You follow me? Yeah. And
Wait, I'm sorry, you went down 5 and up 15,
Yep.
so that's a net 10 increase.
no, it's not. So we went down 5.
Only a thrill
I'll do it
map.
again. No, it's pretty easy math. I'll do it again. I garbled it. We're going down 5 feet in the underlying zoning from orange to green, -5.
Yeah.
On the incentive that is currently on the books, it's already 10. And we're proposing 15. 15 minus 10 is 5. -5 plus 5 is 0. So we're not actually, follow me? The existing code it's an orange line. 45 feet.
So what you're saying is to get back to that height that's allowed
Yes.
currently,
This is
Or you
how
have
we're
to
gonna
drop
do
it
it.
down
We're gonna,
5 feet.
we're gonna
There-
take it
there's-
away from the underlying, 5 feet away from the as
By
of right.
right.
And we'll do a conditional use permit if you play
if
it
they want
well.
to
To
get
go
back.
back
up
up.
to
Isn't a
current
fire
height. Yeah,
lane.
makes sense.
And we'll allow you to get that 55
Yeah.
feet back.
And the size, this is the same, except it's a conditional use permit.
That's good, because my question or comment was, are you facing legal issues with
That's how we're not.
diminution of value?
Yep.
By lowering the economic opportunity for those two parcels?
Exactly.
You're not.
Not.
All right.
And we're not increasing it because that's not our goal.
Yep.
So that's why it needs to go green. And we know from the community plan, we have some mezzanine levels that we wanted because of the grade changes between Daniel and Bow Street is 18 foot, there's an 18-foot drop. The ground floor of the market hall, again, it may never get built, but the ground floor of the market hall had 18 to 20-foot first floor with mezzanines inside in order to work
And this increases our oversight of this proposal.
100%.
All right.
And just to clarify something, because Nick has spent a lot of time on the community plan, I think that analysis has informed what he knows about that site more than anybody at this table for sure. Way, just crazy. But that analysis has informed these zoning changes. It doesn't necessarily create the community plan. I think that's an
That's
important.
absolutely true.
That's something we need to make clear.
Should help.
If you wanted to do it,
Pushes it in that direction.
you know if it could or couldn't, but that's not the goal of this. The
No.
goal is to fix some
You explained the net well.
The net.
You know, and I think I completely glossed over, which is remarkable, the stick for the 1 acre zoning, right?
You did,
It's,
yeah.
it goes from 20% community space to 50.
That's
50.
right. It's
That is the
50.
biggest thing we're doing here outside of the conditional use permit.
Yes.
And I am
Bonus,
confident.
bonus.
Yeah, and I'm confident from looking at existing and proposed and pending projects that just about, do you know Port Walk is the only project that's been approved, built, or pending that doesn't meet the 50% standard of what could qualify as community space. So you go up to the hill with those 16 houses. Well, everything around those houses is generally community space, certainly could be. You can walk anywhere in there. There is a driveway that goes through the middle that fire trucks can use that you might not want to accept. But that is only 38% coverage with all the building footprints on that 1.4 acres. So everybody that I've looked at outside of Port Walk has the ability, that has an acre or more, has the ability to achieve the 50% community space. Some of them are going to have to work harder, but their building footprints don't have to shrink. They just need to use a little more of the space that's left as community space. So I feel comfortable, and just so you know, the community plan, for what it's worth, is at least 55% community space. And so 50 was what I used as a benchmark, and
And
I
part of
thought-
that's the new definitions.
yes. So, sorry I missed that.
This might be a dumb question. Hey, you've heard it from me before. But can we request or require preliminary conceptual design for these, especially these projects that are an acre, to be able to talk about these?
What?
I was going to say, that's like the first thing
Wait,
that,
why is it required?
Well, you have to do preliminary conceptual if, well, there are 3 criteria.
Okay.
Pull them up, but
Well, I can tell you while he's looking that up.
The answer to your question is yes. It might have to
Okay.
go in site plan regs.
Yeah.
but
Yes, because I think.
just like last week, that was good. It was conceptual.
Yeah, a collaborative
So-
conversation
That
about
was just like talking back and
options.
forth.
Correct.
Well, it should, because it also helped with what Jim's point is, because you can identify something early
Yeah.
on and have that conversation before people are committed.
So is that already there, or are we talking about putting it there? I'm
No, it's already, which? Commu-
about the
Conceptual.
preliminary.
That's already there. That's not here.
Yeah, it's there.
It's already there.
Is it?
Yeah.
We also have design review, which is slightly different than pre-conceptual. And what design review does, which most of the contractors want to do, is it will actually lock in their zoning once, because there's actually a public hearing as well. So if they come in and ask for design review, we get an early concept to look at it, just like pre-conceptual design plus they lock in the zoning, so if the zoning's gonna change, they would be able at the zoning that they do.
And there's no vote, there's just public input, but
We
no
just
vote.
say the design review is ended. That's the only
non-binding.
vote we take. It's all
Non-binding.
non-binding.
It's
So
a
there's
back-
two
It's a back
forms
and
of it.
forth without a ruling.
Correct.
Right, it's
But it also
non-binding.
has a public hearing.
Q&A.
You
Q&A.
can just say,
What's
design
binding?
review has ended, but you can continue it for multiple
why
meetings if
everyone's
you
gonna
want
do
to.
it.
Good, I like it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. So, we'd lower it here,
Yes.
like it says, and continue to allow taller buildings. So, yeah, we covered what's written there in the explanation of the 5 minus 5.
Only suggestion would be if you can explain it in the
Easier.
text as well. No, you explain it to us well, because we understand it. But the public, when this goes for public comment, they might freak out if you don't have the opportunity to explain it the way you did to us.
I'll have to do it again, I think. I'll try and do it more succinctly.
It worked good for us, because we know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Nick, my biggest issue with, I guess, the whole McIntyre Bow Street area is the way a future development there will affect shadows on Bow Street. Because honestly, my favorite street in the winter in Portsmouth is Bow Street, because even when the sun is at its lowest height, those buildings get lit up from the sidewalk all the way up.
Yep.
And I would hate to see Bow Street turn into a tunnel of doom like on Port Walk. And I'm just hoping that whatever is built there, that shadow studies are done, or maybe it can be done now to make sure that that section of Bow Street has some feeling of it does now of being very well lit in the winter.
Yep.
Has that nice warm feel to it.
Well, I know that the principal group for the community plan has done all those shadow studies, and they should be online. So you can at least evaluate the impact of what was considered for the community plan on Bow Street. But, so this proposal is neutral. So we are not intending to lower that below what's there today. It's probably not prudent to do so. But take a look at the shadow studies that were already done, and if you can't find them, I'll ask the consultant where they are, because it was many, many months ago they were done, but I remember seeing them, and you raise a good point, and it's worth looking at.
The reality, well, two things. Bow Street is very wide, but also parking lots don't generate a lot of shade. And other than the fence, there's not much there, so, you know.
Right, that's what makes it so special, and I know it's going to change. I
The
just hope
sunlight
it-
is special. That parking lot is not special.
Is
It looks like a loading dock.
Here, here.
The yin and the yang there. I'll take the sunlight and trade the parking lot, but I
There's
think
a way,
you know what
there
I
are
mean.
ways to put buildings there and have some sunlight as well. It's a trade-off. And, you know, like a courtyard of some sort, a break in the buildings would provide, and that might be even more special, to have a spot on Bow Street that maintains that as opposed to looking at a parking lot.
Right, I agree.
No.
Again, I'm trying to avoid the tunnel of doom. that's all.
Popovers building created a lot of shade. I'll take that trade from what was there before. Yes, Beth.
I know I asked this before, and you kind of talked me out of it, but I'm going to go and ask for it again. Because we're doing the conditional use permit for the over 1 acre properties, and we're increased the community space to 50%.
Yeah.
We've also asked for the workforce housing at 10%, but because it's a conditional use permit, we could actually put that up to 20% and then negotiate it down if we have to based off of what they give us. So
Negotiate what down? The 20?
the workforce housing percentage. I'd rather go to a higher percent and have them come in and tell us why they can't give us 20%, they can only give us 10,
Well,
than to have asked for 10 and then they're only going to give us 5.
I would strongly argue, and I'm not the economist, but I've spent enough time, enough time to know 10% of what I'm talking about, which is 90% more than most people, including me last year on the topic. People really have to appreciate how incredibly expensive workforce housing is in this market. It's nothing like Route 1. It's nothing like the Gateway. It is extremely expensive. You know, just as a benchmark idea, you know, the condominiums downtown just stick with sale numbers because they're easier to get your head into rather than the rents, which almost never get done downtown for workforce housing. The sale values go up on each floor of these new buildings, sometimes by $1 million for the 2-bedroom condo. Okay, you build a workforce housing unit and you sell it for 400, and you've lost $600,000 in opportunity cost on the first floor, 1.6 on the second, and maybe 2.5 on the third for one unit. It's just 20%. You do not want to put a builder, developer, whatever you want to call him, or her. You don't want to put them in the position where, hey, I'm not coming in to negotiate. I need to know what the floor is here, not have a floor of 20 that we can negotiate downward. That'll make your world a nightmare, negotiating, and it'll make them less apt, in my opinion, to even come in and have a discussion because it's a black box with no bottom. They don't know from one planning board to the next what the number's going to be.
Which would be a cumulative waste of time for the planning board and the developer.
Exactly. So I think we know we're getting zero, and I don't even think we're close to getting anything. We're way below zero.
Yeah.
So if and this is downtown we're talking.
Yeah.
We need to be very careful. We need to tiptoe into this. Hey, if 6 months from now you got 3 projects and they're all like, yeah, 10% is great, no problem. Then you amend this again and move it up. But we have to recognize the difference between Market Square, the north end, the west end, the bypass, and Route 1. They are almost different planets when it comes to the economic costs and benefits of building a unit.
I'm glad these words are being said out loud. I've always felt this way. Obviously, I'm a huge supporter of workforce housing and so forth. I've always known how difficult it would be to force it into the most valuable real estate in the state.
Impossible.
It's impossible.
It's impossible.
To force it into the center of, the core center of the city.
And remember, we
makes it-
won't
it's so
also
hard.
get community space because they go together. Now it's and. So if they can't make the numbers work on the workforce, then there'll also be no community space. Doesn't mean there won't be gaps between the buildings or a fire lane behind it, but they will not have to provide easements or the level of improvements that are required as community space.
You
So
know,
we have to
in-
be real careful.
In light of this discussion, we might want to think about, rather than percentages, a number of units, because even just 1 or 2 would be a big win.
It actually
It
does
does
both.
require a minimum.
It says, or at least 3 units.
I'm
or
afraid
at
those
least-
numbers are too high.
I'm
afraid those numbers are too high at 3 and 2, because you're talking millions of dollars per each unit if they're anywhere near Market Square. And again, people will not do this, and they'll build market rate housing, and there'll be no community space and no workforce housing. This is an incentive, it's voluntary. So the carrot has to outweigh the stick. You're not in a strong position to say, give us whatever we want. You haven't got a big enough carrot.
I'm
do that.
Big
I'm
picture
interested-
question, I mean, you were talking about downtown with the very small zoning areas.
Yeah.
This does have implications throughout all of town.
No, it's only in the character districts.
only in the
It-
character
Yeah, we're
district.
coming back for the gateway, and that's
We're
where
still
this
looking at
conversation will be much easier,
All right.
as we'll be able to require.
I'm interested, Beth, to kind of hear your thought process on that, because I saw the disdain in your face, but more so
I keep
just
thinking I can
because
convince him.
because I resoundingly agree with everyone that was just talking, but that's the way I think. But you obviously have maybe a different way of thinking here.
Well, because you never know what developer's actually going to come in and whether or not, I get it's expensive and it's hard to do, but you might find one that's, generous and wants to do it.
You won't.
So,
Insane?
You've been hanging out with Mark?
I was gonna say, the only guy in town who's doing that right now is McNabb.
No, well,
It's my hope.
A benevolent developer can do as many as he or she
Exactly.
wants.
They don't need rules.
And, we will hug and kiss and love them very much, but, we can't make it a
10's the minimum,
requirement.
That's right.
Was
You
that
could do 30.
was that truly what you were thinking? Oh, okay, never mind. That's insane. I mean, like,
come on.
no.
out the door.
Dude,
A girl can hope, can't she?
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
I have a comment, which is the carrot is that they get to be in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. There's only one Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I think that is a carrot in and of itself.
We're already
and-
there, Jane.
And everybody's building like house on fire, so I think that it's proving itself to be a carrot. But my question is about the heights of important landmarks. because I just want to make sure that, I like turning down the height, the building height, and making it the green in this zone. But does that mean that I just want to make sure that that whole property area there that's now outlined in green, that's like the McIntyre Square or whatever, that nothing can be built on it that's higher than the church on the hill. And I know that's really high, but we had that on Market Street.
You'll be okay with that.
One Market Street, we had, that building going in that we all went to the site visit, we all looked at, et cetera, and they wanted to push it to be higher than the North Church.
That would be 7 stories to be as high as St. John's.
No, that was one Congress, and that was not going to be higher than the church.
Oh, God,
That
no.
was- No,
Not even
no.
close.
Not even
And it would
close.
have to be
That was
7
a concern.
stories to
You
be
had
higher?
that concern, and remember.
7 or more to be higher than the church on Chapel Street, yes. That's way above grade.
You
Trust
raised
me.
that point, we addressed it, Jane, and it wasn't. It was never proposed to be that high.
And so my question is, do you think that could we have something in our zoning ordinances that just say that you can't build higher than however we're going to define the key landmarks in town?
Washington DC does that, and I don't think we need it. I think we've got the building height.
You don't really have the ability anywhere because of our building height map being so surgical. So different than just about, no one in New Hampshire has a map like this, and probably most of Massachusetts and Maine and Vermont and Rhode Island and Connecticut don't have a map like this.
Surgical's a good word.
Yeah, it is surgical, and it looks like a Christmas tree when you back up and look at the slide before. I'll go back. Those are all the building heights. And look at the table on the right, how many different heights there are.
I've studied
And they're
this,
calibrated
crazy.
to the context in which they're located. And those landmark buildings always exceed any of those colors
Okay.
when they're there. So it doesn't mean you can't crowd a landmark building. That's a challenging thing, but getting taller than them, it just isn't going to happen with that map.
Okay.
Nick has other commitment. Do we need him for any other questions, or?
Well,
Um,
I'll see if Liza has anything.
Well, tonight's no public.
Oh, you're not, okay.
Well done, thank you.
Thank you for your comments, and I'll work on the shared street, the signs, and the height.
Where does this go from here, Nick?
Hopefully, we'll be back. You guys are going to decide if you'll have us back on the 15th.
Do we want to
for
have a
hearing,
public hearing on the 15th?
June 15th?
which is the
15th.
normal.
It's our regular meeting.
Sure.
Can I just make 2 housekeeping suggestions on
Sure.
the presentation? The images, like you even said it, they're all the same for all the title sheets. The images are all the same. It's kind of confusing because it looks like you keep going back to
You mean the
same.
4 buildings?
Correct.
Just take them off.
And then,
Or just mix them up.
and then your backgrounds on the presentation. When consultants send me presentations, when they have all black backgrounds,
Yeah.
if someone has to print it, it's a nightmare because you're using a case of ink to
Black
print
ink.
these things. Yeah.
All right.
And Nick, just a couple questions on the actual document, just 2.
Yep, go
actually.
ahead.
Okay, on page 3, on letter E,
Yep.
it's very, very long. I do see the or in there, but you have a number 1, rent affordable to a household, blah, 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 or I think you need a number 2 in there. I've looked at that over and over. It just needs to be, I think it just needs to be
Oh, you're right.
stated better.
Good job.
And this is a request, please, that at the top of page, next to the last page, the D, the community space shall include trees and other landscaping. Can we define how wide the trunk of the trees will be?
Caliper?
Yeah. To something that's moderately mature, please,
Great idea. So we don't get these little sticks. that
because,
are-
yeah,
The free ones?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
thank you.
And can you number your slides? So during the presentation, can you go back to slide 4, please, so someone can say that? Yeah. Thank you.
Don't listen to him.
No, I'm not, but I'll give you the rest of the comments tomorrow.
Oh, they're throwing flowers at me.
But very good.
Yeah.
I would
Awesome.
say very good.
Yeah.
Exciting
Wrote
topic.
that
Yeah.
down.
Okay, good? Everybody good? With you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Peter.
Bring your dogs next time.
Yeah, right?
Bring your daughters next time. Bring your kids to work night. What's next, boss?
Motion to adjourn. What else
So
we
I had a day like I don't want to have again in my lifetime today, and you just saw a PowerPoint that Nick spent a few days presenting. I have one that I put together in about 15 minutes, but I thought I would just show at least the first couple of slides, maybe skip through the rest, just to remind us of our workshop discussions. Tech going here.
There we go.
I think you have to start it. So, obviously, just copied from January as a reminder. We've talked about these various things. I've also had a conversation with Peter Britz and Peter Stith about changing the order of these things. I didn't have time today. This is just a copy from January. The master plan we've talked about. I think it is important to get that started this year. I've got some comments later. Planning board rules and procedures, still waiting for the legal department. As I mentioned at our meeting last week, they'll have their comments soon. As I said, they do want to go through in more detail even than I had done, so I think it's going to be a good document by the time they get done with it. The other stuff we've talked about, site plan review regulations, I think some of the things we just talked about with Nick might inform some additional additions to that, and I'm just going to skip over those others. The master plan, you all know it. I'm sure you've all read it. At least two of you have because your names are on it. It's got some very, these are the overriding themes. I think the important thing for me, just everybody I think knows this, it's the number one duty of the planning board to work on that from time to time. There's no time, they don't have a finite limit. No master plan is good for 4 years, 8 years, 10 years. It depends on the community. You have communities in New Hampshire that probably don't need to look at their master plan any sooner than every 20 years because nothing happens. Ours is more like every 20 minutes. So, I think it's a good time
It's not
to.
much of a strategic plan if we look at it every 10 minutes.
Well, it depends on what's happening. There's an awful lot happening. There's only 2 sections that are required, and by the way, our existing master plan that you've all read put the statutory requirements at the back, which I thought was an interesting idea, and put all the good stuff up front. That's a nice way of doing things.
It's on purpose.
But because of those 2 requirements, should we have 2 large planning board committees to work on the master plan, and then we have subcommittees to work on the different elements? Because there are things like sustainability that's not a required section, but we obviously need to bring that up to date with current thinking. There might be other things that folks have a particular interest in. I think we should start talking about consultant selection in July if the money becomes available in the budget and the capital improvements plan. And as I mentioned before, and I've talked to the superintendent, I think we need to get students and others, get a very robust and diverse public engagement. I've talked with several counselors at this point. I've talked to several other people. I want to be sure that at the meetings where this is being talked about, it's not a bunch of people that look like us. It needs to be younger people, some older people, people from around the community, different backgrounds. It's really, Portsmouth is changing, and you don't get these other people involved unless you reach out, and that's expensive.
So we got this new, what's his name? The communications dude? Monty.
yeah.
Sorry. This would be a great project for him, community engagement on this.
Definitely have his
Because he also
input.
has the enthusiasm for it.
Yep.
Just trying to use that.
Good point. Good point.
We also can use FlashFit once we have it up and running too.
We used a program up in Vermont during COVID, so we couldn't have public meetings, which really is a pain, as we all know. But people using their phones at home, and they were able to just use words to rate things that gathered, that they keyed in on.
That's that is key, because so many people won't come and speak in front of a crowd.
Right. And you can
Many,
do it.
many
You,
people.
well, with public, you'll get some people we will get people who will speak. We know that.
But we
and-
want new people.
We want new people. And some people will only want to use their phone, but it's all good input. And what those things
Oh,
do,
I'll say it
you know, you may get, traffic's always a big one. You know, you may get ocean level rise is a big one. Digression, I was up in Lake Winnipesaukee 2 weeks ago during the big flood, and a very sincere lady pointed to the lake, it was very high, and said, "That's sea level rise." And I said, "No, ma'am, it's not." So we have to base these things in fact, and I'm sure we'll do that. But if we follow our statutory charge and get started, it will require us starting with meetings this summer. So we can talk about this more at the June workshop meeting.
That's what we signed up for. Let's do it.
Yeah, okay. Yes, Jim?
I was thinking about, priority for me for the master plan, our engagement into the next phase is to review the existing master plan and see what goals have been met, see what goals haven't been met, and which goals we want to carry forward.
Great idea.
So I think that's a good exercise, because a ton of work went into the existing master plan. It'd be a shame to just scrap it and start over and not understand what the goals were.
Should be an amended continuation.
Right.
The master plan is supposed to inform ordinance changes, too. And that's a later topic, and I might just, excuse me, I might just skip forward. I put in a parking section. I'm not going to do that tonight, I don't think, unless you really want me to, because I think parking might need its own night.
It's a subset,
Yeah.
big subset.
Can you escape out and go down, 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 down.
Speaking of page numbers,
Is this all parking? Shape
That's
generation.
all parking.
Parking. Is there any? What is parking?
This is still parking, but I'll just say, Portsmouth zoning that has parking in it, I think parking should come into site plan. I've said this before, because it's a complicated topic. What you didn't see, unless you were looking really fast as we scrolled through those slides, parking is very character and context specific. The ordinance is not. It's size of units for dwellings, and its size of buildings and other uses for other uses. That's classic, typical suburban, and we do have classic, typical suburban, but I think we need to be, it needs a more robust,
so physically, what would have to happen to move it from one point to the other? I know
right. And
she's mentioned
things,
the exact same subject 6 months ago, so how would we move it out of?
it's why West End Yards didn't have enough parking. Because the concept of the West End Yards parking requirement is a very good one. If it was sited downtown, there'd be plenty of parking. Probably too much parking. But where it's located, it's an aspirational parking requirement that was done at the first time, and it wasn't enough, because it's not enough of a walking environment, frankly. It's, you know, it's an automobile-based
Centric
location. Concord has a similar process that we have. Most of the statutes are oriented around towns, and in towns, zoning is all planning board, where it goes to the town meeting. Here, of course, we send it to council, and council votes on it. But in Concord, before the council can vote on it, they ask these questions of the planning board. And I think this is actually a pretty good idea to maybe consider putting this in our zoning, that we give the council this sort of feedback, you know, is it consistent with the master plan? You know, is it consistent with, you know, the other studies we've done? these sorts of things. I think that would be helpful, and it'd be helpful for the public, for us to just think about it. There are a few others there.
Are you talking about this specifically with regards to parking?
No, this is all zoning amendments. This is zoning amendments in general.
Huh.
I just skipped, now I'm out of parking.
Okay, sorry.
Like the one we just had with Nick. You know, right now, what our zoning ordinance says, we're supposed to provide comment to council. Well, that's not very specific. The reason I grabbed these is it is specific. We don't have to copy Concord, but I did like the fact that they require the planning board to give,
The context of our comment.
right. And the things that we're supposed to address, like master plan and other studies, because in the course of doing the master plan, the planning board can ask for studies and,
Yes.
other things that help inform the master plan. And the council isn't expected to get into those weeds, but they can ask us, how we're doing with it. And the last thing, I mentioned this to Beth earlier today, there is one public hearing that's required for zoning amendments. It's under 675-7. Right now, that's done at the council as of the second reading, I think. That hearing could still happen, but the required hearing could happen at the planning board. And the reason I suggested it's something to think about is we can get interactive with the public at our hearings more easily than the council can. So it could provide the public with more of an opportunity, as is going to happen next month if we have a public hearing, which is optional, as I mentioned earlier. But if we have a public hearing, we can engage the public, as we did at the ADU. They get to speak before the presentation, they get to speak after the presentation, and I think that helps better inform what's happening. So, points for thinking of consideration. If you want a 30-minute presentation on parking, I'll do it, but it's 9 o'clock and I don't want to do it unless you're desperate to hear it.
No.
I don't think I could.
I'm not desperate to hear it.
That's why I
I've been
skipped
out late
over it.
every night.
So, should we have a public hearing then on the 15th? Let's
Yes.
just,
Yes. I mean,
Yes.
okay, the consensus, so let's do it. All right. We will make that a part of our meetings.
It's
She
been a
said
long
yes.
week.
She said yes.
Yes.
We always have had them, so
I
I feel
know.
like the precedent has been set that planning board and city council each have public hearings.
I agree.
So,
Why change it?
And with that, unless there's anything else, everybody good? We adjourned?
adjourned.
We are adjourned. Yep.